I'd like to know about detailing the things that aren't fiberglass. Window glass, acrylics, stainless trim, and aluminum. The small things. What tools and compounds are you using for polishing and sealing? Let's talk about the window glass first. This clip is brought to you by PartsView.com. Save money on all your boat or engine parts when you use the link and discount codes in the description below.
First start off with doing, decontamination. You could do your vinegar wash, whatever the case may be to prep the window to get it to that point, tape it off. And then the most common tools that are needed, you could use a buffer, either orbital, that's most common, rotary, either or. It's just based on preference. And then foam pad is going to be, usually a common option. And as far as polish, usually a very light polish. You're dealing with glass, you can go heavier, but depending on what you're removing on the glass, you can just go through, either one or two steps. I personally don't do a lot of glass polishing, but based on my knowledge, when I do polish glass, the best results I've always gotten is using a foam pad. A foam pad and, orange foam pad. And that is able to remove, any minor scratches. And then if you have like staining on the glass, that you might get from hard watermarks and stuff like that. Polishing the glass will remove the contaminants because it's contaminants. So that's the best way to remove the contaminants is by polishing it with a foam pad and then a polish of, they have different types of polish that is up to you on, what you want to use.
Based on the brand or whatever.
Based on the brand and stuff like that.
And you're just taping off like the rubber seal and stuff.
Correct.
To keep the pad and
correct
messing it up.
From keeping, so you want to tape off your area. So if you're working on the glass, usually around the glass you have rubber, and you don't want to contaminate your foam pad with the rubber. And then what happens if you don't tape it off, then you're going to smear that all over the glass as you're working, creating more of a mess than doing good. Yes.
That's funny. So now that hard water, like I've seen that where or think about like showers. People who got the showers, you got real hard water.
Build up.
You got calcium build up into that. Down here in the Keys, we got
it's a common issue.
Calcium in the water or lime or whatever it is.
Yes.
So you really have to. Is there different pads? Like, do you got to start with an abrasive pad, then go to a polishing pad? Or?
Well, they have different types of pads. More aggressive and then less aggressive, depending on how severe and how far you need to go with it. That'll play a factor. But usually, for the most part, if you get the glass clean, most of the boats or vessels we deal with, what we fight a lot is with the salt and the hard water spots, and we do a good thorough decontamination wash first. And then we'll polish the glass, and it just turns out beautifully.
Gotcha. So then he's talking about, what about acrylics? I mean, that's super popular now. Everybody's got an acrylic dash put in.
Yes.
And it's kind of like...
Acrylic is beautiful. However, anytime you're dealing with acrylic, you'll find yourself having to always either use brand new rags, and even as much as just touching the acrylic with your finger or your hands, you can leave that oil and residue behind. So... acrylic, you can also polish it, and preference is, using a wool pad because the wool pad leave a really nice finish and remove any like holograms or any type of imperfections that are there that are minor. Right. If it gets deep into the acrylic, then, sometimes there's very little you can do, but for the most part, to give it that nice shiny finish, polishing with a foam pad is going to be the best option. And then, depending on how aggressive you need to go, they have the different colors, to remove scratches, and then the finishing for the polishing, and gives you great results.
Is that just any regular like 3M cutting compound, or you got to use a special polish?
As far as polish and compounds, it's a preference. They have correction compounds. Like, for example, there's a brand that I love to use, 3D. They make great products, and what I like about their products is they have correction polish, and they have a compound that cuts, at 1,000 and finer. So what happens is it leaves a really nice finish. And there's polish and compounds where people get that mixed up all the time. And what I mean by mixed up is they'll think that they could polish something that is not abrasive enough. You know, a
Yep.
polish leaves that nice glossy finish.
Right,
And
right.
what we do is a correction, correction. So a correction is when you're getting into more in depth of holograms and imperfections. And whenever you put a light on the surface, it brings out all of the imperfections. So on a acrylic panel, especially if it's black, when the sun hits it, you just see everything as an
Oh, yeah.
eyesore. So
Yeah.
that's the best way to take care of that.
Right. Yeah, because you got like a compound. It's got all the like. It's got a grit to it. What grit would you say a compound or a cutting compound is?
Well, cutting compound, they vary in grit. So they have the heavier, they have the medium, and they have the light. For an acrylic panel, you do not need to use an abrasive compound because it's going to create haze and holograms. You want a very fine cutting compound, something that will cut, you know, at 1,000 and finer and leave a really nice finish. But what it's doing is removing imperfections. So you're doing
yeah.
more of a correction on the acrylic panel because it's already shiny, but what you're doing is removing, you know, any impurity, any imperfections that may be left behind from whenever it was wiped with a rag. Because when you initially get acrylic panel and it's installed, they have a clear plastic over it to
Yep.
protect it. So
Yep.
once it's installed, you know, the boat owner, you know, will wash the boat, and sometimes they'll use that brush, the soft brush, and they'll wash everything and not realizing that will scratch.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so sometimes the scratch is a little deeper, and it will require more correction,
right.
and that's where that comes into play.
So and you want to use a foam pad, not a wool pad?
You can use a wool pad.
Okay.
It's preference. So a wool pad versus a foam pad. For me personally, you know, I could use both. My preference on an acrylic is a wool pad because the type of finish that it has, and it leaves a minimal holograms or imperfections behind when using your tool correctly, you know, for a professional.
Right.
If you're in professional industry of doing this, it's all about preference. But me personally, I would recommend using a foam pad.
Okay, because is it more forgiving?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
And if you're using a foam pad, it will have to wool pad will have to be a brand new pad or one that does not have, you know, any type of contaminants. Because mind you, you're working with acrylic, so whatever you do, and that rotary buffer is spinning, is going to create.
Just gonna be scratching it.
Correct.
All right. So then he's wanting to know about stainless trim and aluminum trim. So probably like, you know, the small things like probably cleats, clamshells, door magnets, latches, all that kind of metal stuff.
So same thing. Polishing. You know, you could use honestly with stainless, you can use a compound. They do have products out there that's designed for metal, and what it does is a compound and has wax, so you can pretty much do it in one step. So you're polishing your metal, but then leaving a nice protection on it. So Colonite is a commonly known product that's a metal wax. And if you have like a little rust or water spots, use your terry rag and you polish it, and then you can remove whatever contaminants or dirt or rust that's on the cleat or your stainless, and it's going to leave a nice finish. Sometimes it does require a little bit more of that elbow grease to get some of those stains out. Like there's been times where I've seen etching in stainless, like if the acid has touched it, and you can polish it out. They do have a polishing wheel, but what's worked great for me, honestly, is I'll grab one of my old buffing pads, and I'll put a little bit of product on there, and I'll just use that and buff that stainless. You know, obviously you want to use protection, you know, and face mask to protect yourself, but
Right.
yeah, the results are, you know, are beyond expectation.
So you really got to kind of polish it up. If it, like, let's say you take an on-off or an acid or something like that, and
Yes.
you wipe all the metal down with that,
Which you should not.
which you should not.
Yes.
But when it gets all rusty, that's kind of like kind of what you got to do. Like it, you know, say you've got a piece of metal, it's just all rusty or whatnot.
Correct.
You can just hit that with the on-off to get all that off. But then you got to come back and you got to polish it like with a buffing pad or something, right?
Yeah, so if when you're dealing with stainless, most of the time, stainless in the environment we're in, the big factor we deal with is it will start to get buildup of salt, and then you'll get rust.
Okay.
Sometimes in order to remove the salt, you have to do like a light acid wash, to remove salt off the surface. You can dilute it, but what people fail is they will spray rust remover on the stainless, and what'll happen is it will actually etch the finish of the metal. So that's where you'll get your lines from the chemical. Might remove the rust, but then you're going to be faced with now that metal has
hazing.
So in order to remove that, you can do it by hand with a rag, but the best result obviously is going to be, your next option is using a machine. They have different methods and processes. I mean, I'll share mine with you. What I do is if I run across that situation is I'll use an old buffing pad. I'll apply my product on there and I'll buff out that area, and it will remove the haze because it's more aggressive and you're applying force and it's friction. So, there you go. It'll remove it and it'll look as good as new.
Whereas if you're doing it by hand, you're really
yes.
You got to do it. You got to really work.
You're going to be working. You're going to be working.
Now, if you enjoyed this clip, you can watch the full episode over here, or you can watch another one over here.